Hello everyone, this is Direwolf20 and welcome to an updated mod spotlight, taking a look at Psi for Minecraft version 1.9.4. It's been a while since I've done my last Psi spotlight, and there's been a ton of features added. A bunch of new tricks and spell abilities, a bunch of new items, including a whole set of armor that has some really cool features that I'm excited to show you guys, as well as some pretty complex math stuff to play with if you want to get into that. But as before, you don't have to if you don't want to. So there's definitely some really cool abilities. There's like the ability to summon blocks and summon lights. There's a new item called a vector ruler that lets you select blocks in world. And like I said, there's just a bunch of cool stuff to take a look at. So there's actually a lot to cover. So I'm going to stop talking right now and come back in a second to tell you guys all about the new stuff that we can take a look at in Psi. So the first trick I want to show you guys is a pretty nifty ability called Conjure Block. So what I'm going to do is feed it a position to conjure a block in the world, and it's a temporary block. It can also be permanent if you want, and I'll show you how that all works. So first off, let's pick a spot. I'm only going to choose my entity position. So if I do that, operator entity position of the caster. Cool. That sounds like a pretty easy place. So it's going to conjure a block where I'm standing. Now, to be honest with you, it'll probably conjure the block at my head height. So I probably want to have it like one step below me, right? So let's actually do a vector sum. And we'll choose a vector construct. Hopefully some of this stuff, if you haven't played with Psi in a while, is coming back to you. And we're going to do y -1. So these two vectors will be the sum, and that's where we're going to conjure our block. And then we can feed it a time. This is how long in ticks the block will last. So if I choose 40, it'll last for 2 seconds. Sound cool? Let's do it. Ta-da! There's a block there, and I can even stand on it. Neat, right? And it lasts for 2 seconds. So that's what the conjure block thing does. Now, if you don't feed it a number, it'll last indefinitely. Pretty cool, and you can break it easily enough with a pick. There we go. Make sure to update your spell after you change your stuff. See? Lasts indefinitely, and then it can easily be broken with any pick. Really anything, even an empty hand, can break that thing. So, pretty cool. You can create a nice little bridge or something, right? And these are solid blocks, like I said, so you can walk on them. They'll last forever, or they'll last a set number of time, basically in ticks. Now, to go in tandem with the conjure block, there's also conjure light, which does exactly like it sounds like, right? Right click, and it creates a little light ball. Again, you can feed it a time duration to make it stick around for a set period of time, or you can just break it after a period, right? So that's a pretty nifty trick, and we're going to see some other uses of that pretty much nearby in the future. And finally, you've got conjure block sequence. Instead of conjuring an individual block, you can conjure a sequence of blocks. And in this case, I'm going to conjure a block sequence at the y -2, so 2 below my feet. And then we're going to do a vector multiply of my axial look times 10. What's this going to do? It's going to conjure blocks 10 feet in front of me at my foot level. Cool. So let's go ahead and do that. Cool. I made myself a little bridge. It's 1 by 1. Now the bridge I've currently got set to last for 40 seconds, but I'll probably might want to change this to be something like 100 ticks, that is. So it lasts a little bit longer, and ta-da, I've got a bridge. How cool is that, huh? Neat, right? So conjure block sequence, conjure light, do exactly like they say on the tin. They conjure things, and they're pretty cool. Now, sometimes you might want to choose a block in the world to act as the anchor point for your vector. And maybe you're not so great at vector math and doing the whole looking at something thing, or maybe you want to be looking in a different direction. You just want to have, like, choose this block and cast a spell relative to it, right? That's where the vector ruler comes in. This is a pretty nifty tool. So let's say we wanted to do that, axial look, of my direction 10 blocks out. But instead of starting at my current position, we're going to choose the selector vector ruler. Okay, and we're going to snag that. So if I come over here to this vector, or this block here, and right click, you'll notice it stores the coordinates. I'm going to get a new vector ruler here, currently 0, 0, 0. I right click on it, and it's currently got that. So now if I look in this direction and cast the spell, notice that it comes off of that block. And it's always going to come off of that block. And if I look in that direction, it's going to come off that block. And if I look in that direction, it's going to come off. But it's regardless of where I am in the world and what I'm looking at, it's always going to be coming off that block because that's the starting point. So that's the vector ruler. You craft it pretty easily, and then you can just right-click a block in the world and specify that's where, you know, a vector exists. Cool? Neat. It should also be noted that shift right-clicking sets the vector of the block, so it's basically saying, hey, this block. But then if you right-click on another block, notice that the vector is now 0, 0, 5. That is the vector from this block, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over to this block. Cool? And then if we were to shift right-click on this block again, it would take the coordinates. And then if we were to, for example, right-click without a shift, it's going to set that vector, so x on the -4. So there's multiple ways to use this vector ruler. Basically, you can say, you know, so just the block itself, or right-click again to get, you know, the target. Neat. So another cool thing to check out is a new spell called Trick Smelt Block. Cool. So that's just going to ask for a position of a block to smelt. So I'm going to go ahead and feed it for now. We can kind of clear out these things. We'll do the vector ruler just to make stuff easy, right? Ta-da! So if I, you know, shift right-click on this block and cast the Smelt Block spell, ta-da! It smelted the block. You basically get the smelted version of the block. Cool. Obviously, if you want to smelt grass, you're probably not going to get anything out of that. However, if you had sand, it should, in theory, turn it into glass. Now, in addition to smelting blocks in the world, you can also smelt items that are on the ground. So we'll use the new Trick Smelt item. We're going to randomly choose an entity because it needs one item for a target from an entity list, and that entity list will be nearby smeltables. Oh, that seems nice. The position will be the caster's position, and the radius will be 5. So in theory, if I throw a bunch of sand on the ground and right-click this spell, nice. Cool. Got a bunch of glass. How cool is that? And the same, obviously, for cobblestone. Neat. All right, guys, let's move on to something I'm really excited to show you, which is the armor. Armor can be used to automatically cast spells during certain conditions, and each armor piece has different conditions that it follows. For example, the Psi Metal Exosuit helmet can do it based on a specific event handler, which is the more complex one, but it's also one of the favorite ones of mine. Your chest plate will do it whenever it receives damage. So basically, when you take damage, it'll cast a spell. Your leggings will cast the spells every tick, and your boots will cast the spells every time you jump. Cool? Let's take a look. One of the first ones I'm going to show you is the chest plate because it's pretty easy to demonstrate. So let's say every time we took damage, we wanted to cast regen. Cool? So let's do it. So trick regen. The target will be the caster. Okay. And the power will be just 1, and the time will be just, let's say, 5. Okay, so power 1 time 5. Cool? Easy spell. Nothing complex about it. And then we're going to place that spell into my chest plate. Cool? And then what we need to get is the following device, the Exosuit controller. Not hard to make. When you hold C on this, you'll see that you've got the armor piece selected at the moment. So normally you press C to choose your spells in your CAD, right? With the Exosuit controller, you get to choose the spells with your armor pieces. So I'm going to choose the regeneration spell to make sure that it's active. Also note that you can shift left click to disable any spells. So notice how it says spell selected none. So if I were to go ahead and choose regeneration again, it says spell selected regeneration. Shift right click. We'll go ahead and disable all spells on all your armor. So that's how you use this guy. So now, in theory, every time I take damage, I should get a regen buff. So let's get ourselves some damage. I'm going to spawn a spider. Oh, I have regeneration. Because I took damage, I now have regeneration. Nice. Now that's a pretty defensive ability, right? I'm going to put regen on myself whenever I take damage. Let's do something more aggressive. Let's go ahead and use the smite trick, which is going to go call down a bolt of lightning at a given vector. What vector will that be? I'm going to use the entity vector, and which entity vector? We're going to choose a new selector, which is available. attacker selects the entity that attacked the caster. So basically, whenever I take damage, it should select the entity that attacked me and hit it with lightning. Cool? I think so. So let's go ahead and pop this dude into here. And we're going to make sure to grab our exosuit controller and choose Smite. And let's see what happens. Let's put it back on normal mode. And whenever I take damage from this thing... that is cool. How much fun is that, huh? So using the exosuit chestplate, you can go ahead and basically cast spells whenever you take damage. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you a spell you've already seen. We're going to conjure light. And where are we going to conjure it? At entity position of the caster. Real simple, right? Now this spell, you might be saying to yourself, Dyer, we already saw this thing. Why are you showing it to us? For one very simple reason. Let's go ahead and get this guy, and we're going to put it in our helmet. Okay, now the helmet needs sensors. There's a couple sensors that you can get to go along with Psi. A light sensor that triggers when you're in low-level light. Yeah, you figure where we're going yet? You can also do a water sensor for when you're in water, a heat sensor for when you're taking fire damage, and a stress sensor, which I forget what that one is. The stress sensor is when the player reaches low hit points. So basically, all you need to do is craft your helmet with the light sensor, and you'll see that it's got a little light sensor on it now, and we're good to go. And when you hold shift, you'll see the spell selected and what it does. So let's go over here, and we're going to choose I think I forgot to do something here. What did I do wrong? It's called Smite, but it's Conjure Light, so let's rename it. It'll work, don't worry. And now, whenever I go into low light, it should automatically cast the Conjure Light spell, provided I do this. So let's go find a cave. So here we go. I'm going to hit F4 to bring up my light levels, which don't appear to be working too well. That's weird. But if we go downstairs here, notice I'm not doing anything, right? But lights are showing up. How cool is that? Awesome, right? Haha, that is so cool. So basically, combination of light sensor and conjure light, and you can go ahead and automatically cast the light spell whenever it's too dark where you're standing. Nice. Long story short, that's a really neat spell, and I'm going to be using it a lot. You can do a bunch of other sensors, obviously, and you can come up with your own plans around how you might want to use those, right? So water sensor, you could do something with water breathing. Heat sensor, you could do something with regen, right? Stress sensor, you could do something with regen. So a bunch of different options. And to get your sensor out, you just craft that guy like that, and boom, right? So your sensors come out. And you can swap them in and out as you wish. Sweet. So I'll let you guys come up with some cool uses for the leggings and the exo boots. I've seen a couple spells. So if I looked up if you go to Reddit, there's like there's a Psi spell compendium subreddit that a lot of people have posted some really cool ones. So if we like pulled this one in here, for example, this is a neat spell. Basically, you can make it so that it puts a castle of blocks around you so that nobody can get to you. And even if you try and like break out, like they can't get in. So it might be a neat way to protect yourself from like skeletons or something who are trying to attack you. Notice, by the way, that we're not using any Psi energy. We are to conjure these blocks. However, it's using less than you're currently regenerating. Remember, you regenerate some ability or some Psi energy every tick. This spell is constantly casting these. And as soon as I turn it off with a shift right click, the blocks are gone and I can get out, right? And then if I activate it again, boom, I'm in there, right? Cool. Very cool. So basically keeping that in mind, yeah. You're basically not using energy because you are using it, but you're regenerating more than you're using. So there's some really neat abilities and cool stuff you can come up with. This is a more complex spell than I'm capable of crafting, but definitely like look up the Psi spell compendium on Reddit, and you'll find a lot of cool spells that other people have written. And like I said, it's real easy. You just shift click on the import from clipboard, and it's there. Speaking of, you can post your spells to Reddit really easily. Notice if you look over here, Programmer Help, hold Shift, you'll see there's a bunch of cool keybinds that you can do. So you can delete pieces, you can clear the entire grid, you can shift the grid around, copy and paste, undo and redo, right? All kinds of neat abilities and hotkeys to do on the grid. So as you're writing your code, it gets easier. One of the best things for me is the ability to shift the grid. I found as I was writing complex code, like I wanted to like move stuff. and it was hard without deleting and rewriting everything, but now you can control and use your arrow keys to like move stuff around in the grid, and it makes it really easy. And of course, Control Shift Delete to clear stuff, and then there was Control Z and Control Y to undo, redo. Cool. So lots of cool abilities here. Check them out. Obviously, upload to Imager, upload to Reddit, and that kind of cool stuff. And then you can do some search terms as well. So much cool stuff to make it easier to write your spells. All right, guys, in addition to some new spell mechanics, there are also some new spell bullets. One of them I want to show you right now is the following spell bullet called the Mine. So the Mine spell bullet, as we are aware, there's multiple spell bullets, right? There's the projectile, and there's the loop, cast, and circle, and grenade. This is another type called Mine, which is actually pretty cool. So I've made a spell. It's really easy. Trick Smite targets the entity position of the focal point. As you may recall from the projectile bullet, which we covered in earlier versions of the Spotlight, the focal point is basically when you cast a spell that's a projectile, right? So this time we're casting a spell that's a mine. So let's go ahead and check it out. I'm going to just shoot the ball over there, and we've got a little mine sitting on the ground. Neat. Now if we get the spider to walk across the mine, come here, buddy. Haha! He triggers the spell. Cool. And of course, note that you can't trigger your own mines, because that would be a little bit silly. Exact words that Basky said to me when I said, why can't I trigger my own mines? Cool. So, mines are neat. There's another type of bullet as well. The other type of spell that we're going to take a look at is the charge spell bullet. Ta-da! I'm going to go ahead and remove my smite spell, that is the mine, and we're going to put the charge one in there, okay? And this guy is pretty cool. It's pretty much the same mechanic, except you have a spell detonator item now, which you can go ahead and right-click, and it will activate the spell on right-click. How cool is that? Now, obviously, this works with pretty much every spell type, you know, excepting for, you know, probably a few limitations, but for the most part, it's like pretty much awesome, right? Like, a remotely detonatable spell. I mean, Smite's cool, but you could do like a lot of stuff with this. So neat. I just gotta try it. I just gotta. It's like, it's a need. Right click. That was the explode trick. I just had to try it. I needed to. It was necessary. So guys, here's a quick spell that will go ahead and let me place a block at a distance. Probably not something that you're unfamiliar with, right? We've seen spells like this in the past. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is in the past, you're probably familiar with the fact that this only works with the block that's on the right-hand side of the casting gun, right? So that block always has to be to the right. Well, luckily, there's a new nifty little thing to check out. What we're going to show you guys is detection and focus. This gives you a new trick which allows you to switch the focus slot. Changes the focus slot of the spell, position, or shift. So there's actually two inputs and they're a little bit mutually exclusive. And if you read through here, it'll basically tell you what it is. It's basically relative to the CAD or an absolute slot. Okay, so let's take a look. So I'm going to go ahead and do a focus slot. And we're going to just give it a number. We'll say 9. Okay. So position or shift. Position is, you know, an absolute slot. So that basically means that whatever's in slot number 9 is what's going to get placed. Cool. Regardless of where your gun is, right? Now, if we wanted to use shift instead of position, we could do this. Cool. And what this will do is I'm doing shift 2, right? So normally it would be shift 1, which would be 1 to the right. Now it's shift 2, which is 2 to the right. So this should place that. And then notice that if it's here, it's obviously not going to work. But as long as the block is 2 to the right of your gun, it's going to work. So that's the difference there. So you can specify using a variable input what to place. And that's pretty useful because it means that you can, you know, place different blocks based on different variables, which is cool. So you guys probably remember my break 7 above or below based on whether or not I'm sneaking spell that I've used in previous episodes of my Let's Play series. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this instead using place block sequence. Now remember, it's going to place 7 above the block I'm looking at, including the block I'm looking at. So without any kind of modifiers, this should place, including this block, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Neat, right? Now, what if I wanted to variably determine how tall I wanted this wall I'm building to be? That could be cool, right? So I'm going to do something. First off, I'm going to specify with a spell focus. So there we go. We've got a spell focus slot. We're always going to use slot number 5 to build with. So whatever's in slot 5 is the block that we're using to build with. Cool. Now at this point, the spell will only build block 7 tall, unless I'm sneaking, and then it's 7 down, right? Let's change that so we can use a variable. I want to go ahead and say whatever block is in slot number 6 specifies how many tall we'll build. So if there's 5 cobblestone in here, it'll build 5 tall. And if there's 10 cobblestone in here, it'll build 10 tall. How cool would that be? Well, luckily, there is a little mechanic here in detection and focus called selector item presence that selects the size of an inventory item stack and returns it as a number. So basically, we have to say choose an inventory slot and give us the number of items inside of it. But it's unfortunately a little bit more complex than that. So if we look, we'll notice that if we went ahead and select item presence and we did slot 6, okay, we'll say that. This guy is not happy because he needs a constant number. That's what the max should be. It should be a constant number. And this guy just returns a regular old number. Because of the way Psi numbers work, we actually have to do something a little bit different. So let's go ahead and do a place block sequence here again. We'll do our position and target. And the max, we're going to use a constant wrapper, it's called. And what that basically does is it turns a number into a constant number. And you can see that it, gets a number and spits out a number constant. So that should make this guy happy, okay? So we'll go ahead and get this target, which will be the selector presence for slot 6. And notice that this thing also needs a constant fed into it as well. Think of this as like a limiter. So we're going to say like it can't get any bigger than 20. And that's just going to make things a little bit more happy for the way Psi math works. So we'll go ahead and do that, and now the spell is happy. The only other thing we have to do is change this. This also affects how tall it is, this number 7 here, so I'm going to remove it. I'm going to change the pointer to the bottom, and I'm just going to point back at our number constant, okay? So now, the number of items in this slot should determine how tall it's going to be. And remember, just because I haven't tweaked the spell too much, it's going to go off of the block I'm looking at. So this should go 2 blocks above what I'm looking at, including the one I'm looking at. 1, 2. Cool. Now, if I put a few more in there, it should go 5 blocks, or let's say 6, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Neat, right? Finally, the last one here, selector block presence. Basically, you give it a vector or a block space, and if there's nothing there or something that can be overwritten, like tall grass, it's going to give a 0 as the return. So it basically checks to see if there's a block already in the place. If not, then it's 0. If it's a solid block, then 1, and if it's a non-solid block, it's 2. So let's get into the complex mechanics of flow control. So now we're getting further away from here's the stuff it can do, and we're getting into how to do it in some interesting ways. So this is a complex subject, but I'm going to hopefully explain it to you guys. And if you read through the tabs here, it's actually pretty easy to follow. So there's 4 rules that you need to know before we get into flow control. Number 1, spells execute in the order that the arrows drawn in the spell programmer point towards. So that basically means that, whatever the arrows point towards, that's the order in which they execute. Okay. Rule number 2 of flow control is any given piece's value will only be evaluated once. That means that, for example, if you had an operator random, which chooses a random number, and you had 3 tricks looking at it, that value will only be calculated once, and all 3 tricks will output the same information, right? So I'll just do that random die roll once, and then all 3 tricks will say, yeah, it was a number 3 that came out. Cool. Number 3 rule is a piece will only be evaluated when another piece requires its values. Okay, so these chains are triggered by the trick pieces. So basically what that means is that in here, when we needed to calculate the constant wrapper value, it didn't do so until the trick block sequence asked for it. And the same for this, right? All this math over here that calculates whether or not we're standing in the right place and if we're sneaking or not and all that stuff, it doesn't calculate any of this math until the trick asks for it, okay? And then finally, rule number 4 of flow control is tricks are always executed from left to right and top to bottom. So tricks are pretty much the boss. They're the guys who are calling the shots, and they're executed from left to right and top to bottom. Therefore, a trick in the second row will always be executed after a trick in the first. So the placement of these slots is pretty important, which is why I made sure to put my focus slot in the top left. This top left slot will be the first trick evaluated regardless of anything else in here, okay? So let's go ahead and see how we can play with this. So there's a bunch of neat things we can do to control the flow. And the first one we're going to look at is sleep, which basically makes the trick, the spell overall, wait a little bit of time in ticks before it actually executes. So let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to move these down, and that way we make sure that everything's here. And I'm going to go ahead and put a sleep spell in here, trick. And we're going to tell it to delay 30 ticks, which is a second and a half. Cool. And I'm going to cast the exact same spell, and we're going to do just 3. So this should wait a second and a half before proceeding. Ta-da! Notice that I looked away and the spell didn't really work. Why is that? Because it didn't evaluate my position until a second and a half. Cool. Now, if I were to move this sleep, it might adjust how things work. For example, if I put the sleep at the end of the spell, obviously it would make sense that this spell is going to execute right away still, and then there's a second and a half sleep at the end, which you can't really tell because there's no tricks after it. But if we did something like sleep 30, and then put a debug down here, and then we cast it, 30 ticks later, it should output the number 30. So a second and a half, and boom, the number 30 is written. Got it? So top left to bottom right. So what if we wanted to look at a block, right-click, and then wait 30 ticks, and then place it on those blocks, regardless of where we changed our view direction? Remember, it's not going to calculate this vector ray cast with entity position and entity look until the block sequence trick is executed. So it's the tricks that make us figure out where this position is going to be, right? So let's go ahead and do this. We can take a look at one of the abilities called flow control, which is trick evaluate. What that does is it doesn't actually do anything except force something to be evaluated. So basically no actual actions occur, it's just going to evaluate the value that we're looking for before a sleep is executed. So we can go ahead and move this stuff down again a little bit, and I'm going to remove this vector ray cast, entity look, entity position, and we're going to move it over here, okay? So we're going to do ray cast, entity look, entity position of the caster. And then we're going to force this to evaluate by using the evaluate trick, okay? So we're just going to evaluate this vector ray cast. Now when we're looking at this block sequence, we can draw our line over to it. And in theory, what should happen is if we were to put a sleep here of 30, right? Remember, left to right, top to bottom. So the first thing that should go across is we should switch our focus slot. Then we'll get our sneak status. Then there's no tricks on this line. The next trick we run into is evaluate. Then we'll run into the sleep trick, and then we'll run into the place block sequence. So let's see if I'm right. This should, in theory, get where I'm looking. I can look away, and it'll still place the blocks on that slot. Unlike before, where we saw when I looked away, it placed the blocks on the block I was looking at the end. Cool? So it evaluated where it was going to put the item, then it slept for a second and a half, and then it placed the items. Neat, right? And remember, there's a huge arsenal of tricks that you can do with Psi. I'm just trying to use some pretty basic mechanics like placing a couple blocks to show you how to use complex mechanics like evaluate and sleep. Keep in mind, you could do all kinds of cool stuff with this, right? You could do your lightning tricks, you could do block sequences, you could wait a few seconds and place another set of blocks, you could place blocks, wait, and then remove them. Like, there's a whole bunch of cool stuff you could do, right? So it's neat. The next trick, which I'm not going to show you, but I'll tell you about, is pretty straightforward. Basically, it's called trick die. And what that does is if you pass it a number that's between -1 and 1, exclusive, meaning -1 and 1 don't count, but negative 0.9999999 to positive 0.9999999, it'll basically stop the spell's execution. So you can use variables to determine, hey, if we've gotten to a certain point or something like that, basically when it hits 0, it'll stop the spell execution right then and there, and it won't carry on anymore. And you can use selector sneak status, which conveniently gives you a 0 if the caster is sneaking and 1 if they're not. Cool? So you can pretty much use sneak to stop a spell, or you can use any other way of passing a 0 in to stop a spell. Now, constant wrapper we've already looked at allows you to make use of number type pieces for tricks that would otherwise require a number constant. So we kind of already saw how that works. And you can just see some of the details in here as to why it needs a constant input as well. Okay? Pretty cool. So those of you who remember, it was a little bit tricky sometimes to find an entity that you're looking at. So luckily, we got operator focused entity. Gets the entity that the target is looking at. Cool. So I can go ahead and do a smite spell for this thing. Cool. Position is focused entity. And we'll go ahead and use entity position smite. Cool. So let's go ahead and get ourselves a spider again. Easy peasy. So basically it looks for an entity that you're looking at. Neat. So that's just a neat little focused entity. That's another operator that we can get. Now there's another couple things I want to show you before we have to wrap up the episode here. So another new ability is called memory management, which you've seen here. We can actually save and recall saved vectors, and we can save them in the CAD itself. So we can basically have a spell write some information to the CAD in terms of vector and then recall it later. Neat. Let's take a look. So first off, the number of save slots that we have is equal to the number of sockets, which you can see here on the screen is 10, divided by 3 rounded down. So 10 divided by 3 rounded down would be 3. So we can save 3 different vectors to the memory of this casting assistant device. Let's see how to do it, shall we? So I have a very simple spell. Smite, vector raycast, entity position, entity look, raycast. Cool. So basically this spell will shoot lightning wherever I'm looking. Look there, shoot lightning. Look there, shoot lightning. Cool. Instead of shooting lightning, we're going to do a save. Okay? Trick, save, vector. We just have to tell it which vector we're going to save, that one, and which slot to save it in. I will save it in slot 1, which is the first slot. Cool. And we will call this save vector. Okay. Now I'm going to need another spell bullet in a minute here, but I'm going to save this block slot. Ta-da! This was the first time using the spell, so I leveled up. Hooray me. But I just saved the vector. So now vector slot 1 in my CAD remembers this block position right here. Okay? Neat. Cool. Let's go ahead and create a new spell called smite. And where are we going to smite? Vector selector saved vector. Cool. And I'm just going to say slot 1. So find the vector in slot 1 that you just saved in your prior spell and cast smite at that position. Cool. So we're going to do smite, regardless of where I'm looking. It's always zapping at that spot because I said, hey, remember this position, and then start casting smite. Now, if I wanted to save another vector, like that block, and then smite it, pretty cool. So memory management, fun stuff. So I'm guessing you guys remember the IDEO spells, right? Trick reversal and trick anchor that allow you to go back in time a little bit. Now there's a new one that was added to this called selector IDEO's changelog. Selects a position from the changelog. Basically, it gives the vector of where your entity was X number of ticks ago. So let's, instead of doing this, we're going to smite, and we're going to do IDOS changelog, and we're going to say 30 ticks ago, which is basically a second and a half ago. So if I'm walking and I cast this spell, notice about a second ago, that's where I was standing. Second and a half, because that's why I made it 30 ticks, right? So if I'm running along here and I cast, that's where I was about a second and a half ago. Neat, right? So just a way to get a position of where you were X number of seconds ago. And of course, you could do stuff like place blocks or what have you, right? So if I made this place block position, right? And as I'm running along, place a block wherever I was 30 ticks ago. Neat, right? You could do some cool stuff with leggings, I would imagine, with this. You could probably do some really cool stuff with leggings, I imagine, with this. Now, there's one more set of abilities in Psi that I haven't covered yet, but we're getting close or past the wrapping up point for this video, and coincidentally, they're the things that I'm probably going to just skip right now. I might do a separate video on these. Go ahead and let me know in the comments if you'd like me to, and maybe Vasky will talk me into it. But so there's a couple things. So first off, there's the secondary operators, which are just pretty much math stuff. So you can square numbers, so take a number and get the square of it. You can get the min between three small values and the max and cube, operator power, operator square root. You can get the logarithm, ceiling and floor, round, e, constant e. So these are just things that are pretty neat to have math-wise. So it's not anything particularly specific to Psi, but they're very, very much math things. The other one is trigonometry. Vasky went ahead and added some trigonometry type stuff, which is, obviously useful for vectors and complex math and stuff. So you can get the constant pi and return that, and you can do sine, cosine, arc cosine, and vector dot product. Stuff that is a little bit beyond my mathematical skills at the time of this recording. So if Vasky talks me into doing a video on those, or if you guys really want one, I will probably do one. But for now, Direwolf20 signing off on the Psi Spotlight, Part 4, this would be, I guess, or the updated Spotlight from what's come since the last few videos I did. I definitely hope you guys enjoyed checking it out. My opinion, as always, is Psi is a really neat mod. There is just so much cool stuff you can do, and it's really only limited by your imagination. And if you're really not understanding how to use these things, check out that subreddit, the Psi Spell Compendium, or whatever it was that I mentioned earlier. There's a bunch of really smart people playing with Psi, and they have come up with some really neat spells and abilities that are just cool to use. So even if you want to do like complex stuff and you can't figure it out, go there. And I highly recommend just playing with it. It's, again, a mod that you will get the hang of if you give it a try. If you just look at it and say, there's no way I'll be able to figure that out, and you don't try it, then you won't figure it out. But if you do try, you may surprise yourself. So for now, Direwolf20 signing off. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Take it easy.